The dog was not sleeping because she was tired. She was sleeping because she was keeping watch. Former Staff Sergeant Michael Carter saw her just after 6 a.m. on Main Street, when the Pennsylvania morning was still gray and the bakery windows held the last dull reflection of the streetlights. Frost silvered the parking meters. A delivery truck groaned 2 blocks away. Somewhere behind the church, a bell struck the hour with a tired sound that seemed to fade into the cold brick buildings. Michael carried 2 food pantry boxes in the back of his old pickup, one for Mrs. Delaney on Pine Avenue and one for a retired mechanic who refused help unless it came before breakfast. He was 40, white, broad-shouldered, and quiet in the way some former U.S. Marines become quiet after years of hearing too much. He almost drove past Whitman's bakery. Everyone did now. The closed sign had hung in the front window for 3 days since Eleanor Whitman went to the hospital, and without the smell of fresh bread spilling onto the sidewalk, the little bakery looked smaller, lonelier, like a heart that had forgotten to beat. Then Michael saw the German Shepherd. She lay curled beside the narrow basement door on the side of the building, her sable and black and tan coat dusted with frost, amber eyes half open, head pressed against the crack beneath the frame. A paper cup of water sat near her paw, frozen at the rim. Someone had left half a sandwich on a napkin. She had not touched it. Michael parked and stepped out slowly. His boots scraped salt from the curb. The dog lifted her head, watched him, then lowered it again to the basement door as if listening to a voice only she could hear. "Hey girl," Michael said. His breath turned white. The German Shepherd did not wag her tail. She did not growl. She only placed one paw against the lower hinge and gave the wood a tired scrape. Once, then again. Michael looked closer. Around the hinge were old claw marks, fresh scratches, and a thin yellow ribbon caught in a splinter near the frame, fluttering faintly in the wind. A bakery ribbon, the kind Eleanor tied around cookie boxes for children at the church pantry. Michael crouched, careful not to crowd the dog. She smelled of cold fur, sidewalk dust, and something sweet beneath it all. Flour maybe, vanilla maybe, the ghost of a kitchen gone dark. "Are you waiting for Eleanor?" he whispered. The dog's ears moved at the name, but her eyes did not leave the door. From Main Street, a man carrying coffee called out. "She has been there since yesterday. Poor thing, just misses the old lady." Michael almost accepted that. It would have been easy. A loyal dog waiting at a closed bakery. A sad story, but a simple one. Then the German Shepherd lifted her head, pressed her ear to the door, and held perfectly still. Michael stopped breathing with her. Beneath the wood, from somewhere below the bakery floor, came the faintest sound. Tap, tap, tap. The dog looked at him then, and Michael understood. She was not waiting for the bakery to open. She was waiting for someone to open the basement. Michael stayed crouched beside the basement door, one gloved hand hovering near the old hinge, while the German Shepherd watched him with the stillness of a dog who had already spent every ounce of strength trying to be understood. The 3 taps did not come again right away. Main Street kept waking around them. Tires hissed over salted pavement. A coffee shop sign buzzed to life across the road. Somewhere, a snow shovel scraped concrete. Ordinary sounds, safe sounds, the kind that could bury a small warning if a man let them. Michael did not let them. He leaned closer to the door, careful not to press his weight against it. The wood was swollen from winter damp, and a thin draft slipped through the bottom gap, carrying the cold smell of stone, old flour, cardboard boxes, and vanilla sugar. The yellow ribbon fluttered against the hinge. The German Shepherd lifted her paw and touched it once, then looked toward the locked handle. "You have been trying to show them," Michael said quietly. The dog gave one tired breath through her nose. A woman in a red coat slowed on the sidewalk. "That is Grace," she said. "Mrs. Whitman's dog. Poor thing. She has slept here every morning since the bakery closed." Michael looked up. "Every morning?" The woman nodded. "And most nights, I think. People leave food, but she will hardly eat. Eleanor fell at home 3 days ago. Pastor Green found her and called the ambulance. Bakery has been locked since. 3 days." Michael felt the number settle into him like a stone dropped into deep water. "Did anyone work here after school?" he asked. The woman blinked at the question. "Sometimes Rosie Bennett helped box cookies for the church pantry. Sweet little girl." "What?" Before Michael could answer, Grace pressed her ear to the lower panel again. Her whole body tightened. Michael lowered his head beside hers and listened through the cold wood. Nothing. Then, so faint he might have missed it before Afghanistan taught him that survival often whispered. Tap, tap, tap. The sound came from below, not the street, not the pipes. Below. Michael stood and took out his phone. He did not try to force the door. He did not kick it. He had learned long ago that panic could turn rescue into danger. He called Officer Tom Harris at the town police station and then Pastor Samuel Green at the food pantry. His voice stayed level, but his eyes stayed on the basement door. I am at Whitman's Bakery. Grace is here. I heard tapping from the basement. The pause on the other end of the line told him enough. Pastor Green arrived first, coat half-buttoned, breath white in the cold. Rosie's mother called last night, he said before Michael asked. She thought Rosie was staying with her aunt after school. The aunt thought she was home. They have been calling around since midnight. Grace rose then, stiff and slow, and placed herself in front of the basement door, not blocking the men, guarding the sound behind it. Michael looked at Pastor Green, then at the yellow ribbon caught in the hinge, the same kind wrapped around every bakery box Eleanor sent to the pantry. This is not about a dog missing her owner, Michael said. Grace scratched the door once, softer now, as if she knew someone had finally heard. Someone is down there. Officer Tom Harris arrived with a ring of town keys, a flashlight, and the careful face of a man who understood that a closed door was not always empty. He parked beside Michael's pickup without using the siren, then crossed the frosted sidewalk while Pastor Green held back the few townspeople who had begun to gather near the bakery windows. Grace stood at the basement door with her body angled toward the lower crack, ears forward, frost melting along the dark ridge of her back. She looked exhausted, but the moment Tom knelt near the lock, she stepped closer and touched her nose to the yellow ribbon caught at the hinge. Michael saw the ribbon move. It was not tied there neatly. It had been pushed through from inside, torn at one end, dusted with flour. Rosie used those ribbons, Pastor Green said, his voice low. She tied every cookie box like it was a birthday present. Michael crouched again and spoke toward the bottom of the door. Rosie, my name is Michael. I am outside with Officer Harris. If you can hear me, tap 3 times. They waited. A truck passed on Main Street. The bakery sign creaked faintly above them. Grace lowered her head until her ear nearly touched the wood. Then the answer came. Tap, tap, tap. Softer than before, but clear enough to make Pastor Green cover his mouth. Tom looked at Michael. We open it slow. Michael nodded. Slow is safe. The officer checked the frame, the old exterior latch, and the swollen bottom edge where winter damp had sealed the door tighter than it should have. Locksmith is 4 minutes out, Tom said. I have permission from Eleanor's nephew to enter for emergency welfare check. I would rather not damage this unless we have to. Grace made a low sound, not impatience exactly, more like pain from waiting. Michael placed his hand near her shoulder, not touching until she leaned into it. We hear her, he whispered. You got us here. The locksmith came in a blue van with his coat unzipped and his hair still wet from a rushed morning. His name was Mr. Keller, and he worked with quiet hands. No one spoke over him. The cold air filled with tiny metal sounds, the soft scrape of a pick, the click of the old lock giving way, the breath of people holding hope carefully because hope could make a man careless. When the door opened 2 inches, the smell came first, flour dust, sugar, damp stone, cardboard, and the stale sweetness of old vanilla. Grace tried to push forward, but Michael held the space with his body, gentle and firm. Let us check first. He opened the door wider and shone his flashlight down a narrow set of wooden stairs. Rosie, a small voice came from below, thin but awake. Is Grace there? Grace barked once, a hoarse broken sound that made the whole sidewalk fall silent. Michael closed his eyes for half a breath, then looked at Tom. She is alive. They moved carefully down the stairs, Tom first with the light, Michael behind him with a blanket from the pickup. The basement was not a dungeon, not a place of cruelty, just a bakery storage room forgotten beneath a locked building, shelves lined with flour sacks, cans of pie filling, cardboard boxes, and holiday tins waiting for a season that had not come yet. In the far corner, near a stack of cookie boxes tied with the same yellow ribbon, sat Rosie Bennett, 8 years old, wrapped in an old tablecloth, cheeks pale with cold, eyes wide beneath tangled brown hair. Beside her were 2 empty water bottles and a tin of shortbread cookies opened with careful little hands. Michael stopped at the bottom step so his size would not frighten her. "Hi, Rosie," he said softly. Grace stayed outside the door. Rosie's lips trembled. "I knew she would." Rosie did not reach for the blanket at first. She looked past Michael, past Officer Harris, up the stairwell toward the slice of gray morning where Grace waited above. Children who have been brave too long do not always know how to stop being brave when help arrives. Michael understood that. He stayed at the bottom of the stairs, keeping his voice soft and his hands open around the folded blanket. "Grace is right outside," he said. "She has been guarding the door." Rosie swallowed and nodded, but her eyes filled. "I pushed the ribbon through," she whispered. "I thought she would smell the cookies." Tom knelt near one of the shelves, giving her space. "That was smart, Rosie." The girl looked down at the flower on her sleeves, the tablecloth around her shoulders, the shortbread tin beside her knee. "I came to get Mrs. Whitman's recipe cards. She told me once that if anything happened, the Christmas bread recipe was in the blue box. I thought Pastor Green would need it for the pantry bake sale." Pastor Green, waiting at the top of the stairs, made a sound that was almost a prayer. Michael saw the blue recipe box on a shelf nearby, already pulled halfway out, as if Rosie had done exactly what she came to do before the basement door closed behind her and the old latch refused to open from inside. No bad intent, no villain, just an old building, a sick owner, a child with too much kindness, and a door that had mistaken silence for emptiness. Michael stepped closer only after Rosie reached for the blanket. He wrapped it around her shoulders, careful and slow, then offered one arm for balance. "We are going upstairs now," he said. "No hurry." Rosie tried to stand, but her legs shook from cold and hours of sitting still. Tom moved to her other side, steady but gentle. Together, they helped her to the stairs. At the first step, Grace barked once from above, low and cracked, and Rosie's face changed completely. "Grace," she cried, and the sound carried up the narrow stairwell like the first warm thing the basement had heard in days. Michael felt something old open in his chest. Years before, in another town, he had walked away from a house that looked empty because the checklist said it was empty, because the windows were dark, because no one answered. Later, he learned there had been a man inside who could not reach the door. That memory had followed him into every volunteer route, every food pantry delivery, every quiet morning when a closed curtain made him slow down. Today, a German shepherd had done what his guilt had never stopped asking him to do. Check again. Listen again. Open the door. When Rosie reached the sidewalk, Grace pushed past the cold air and pressed her head against the girl's blanket. Rosie dropped both hands into the dog's fur and began to cry, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for everyone watching to understand she was safe now. Grace stood perfectly still, accepting the weight of the child's relief as if it were the only payment she had ever wanted. An ambulance pulled to the curb without sirens. Paramedics wrapped Rosie in a warmer blanket and checked her gently. Pastor Green called her mother. Officer Harris spoke into his radio. Main Street, which had been busy 5 minutes before, had gone quiet around the bakery. Michael looked down and saw the yellow ribbon still caught at the hinge, bright against the old wood. Grace saw it too. She touched it with her nose, then looked back at Rosie. The message had arrived. The door was open. Rosie's mother arrived before the ambulance doors closed. Her name was Claire Bennett, and she came running down Main Street in a wool coat thrown over pajamas, hair loose, face pale from a night no parent should have to live through. Officer Harris caught her gently by the elbow, not to stop her, only to slow the moment enough for Rosie not to be startled. But Rosie had already heard her mother's voice. She turned under the paramedic's blanket, small and tired and alive, and reached out. Claire folded around her daughter with such care that even the people on the sidewalk looked away for a second, as if love that raw deserved privacy. Grace stood beside the ambulance step, amber eyes fixed on Rosie's face, body trembling now that her watch was over. Someone offered the German shepherd a bowl of water. She sniffed it but did not drink. Someone else brought sausage from the diner. She ignored that too. Michael noticed. He had seen that kind of focus before, in Marines who would not sit until every name on the list was accounted for. "Let her see the girl," he said quietly. The paramedic nodded and lowered one hand. Rosie reached down from the blanket and touched Grace between the ears. "I am okay," she whispered. Only then did Grace lower her head to the water bowl and drink. Slowly at first. Then deeply, Main Street exhaled around her. Pastor Green stood near the bakery wall with both hands folded over the blue recipe box. His eyes were wet, but his voice stayed steady as he spoke to Claire. She went down there for Eleanor's cards. She was trying to help with the bake sale. Claire pressed her cheek against Rosie's hair. Of course she was, she said, and the words held grief, pride, and the soft ache of almost. Michael stepped back from the ambulance and looked at the basement door. The yellow ribbon was still caught in the hinge, fluttering with each passing car. A small thing, bright, easy to miss if a man walked fast. Dr. Linda Moore, the veterinarian, arrived in a compact car with a cracked windshield and a medical bag on her shoulder. She knelt beside Grace on the sidewalk, spoke to her in a low voice, and checked her paws, ears, gums, and ribs. Cold, exhausted, a little dehydrated, she said. Pads are sore from the pavement and frost. No serious injury that I can see, but she needs warmth and rest. Grace tolerated the exam, but her eyes kept returning to Rosie. She would not leave, Michael said. Dr. Moore looked at the bakery door and the claw marks near the bottom panel. Some dogs do not understand leaving when someone they love is behind a door. The ambulance took Rosie to the clinic for observation, and Grace rode with Dr. Moore after Rosie promised she would see her soon. The crowd began to thin. Coffee cups were picked up. The sandwich left for Grace was wrapped and thrown away. Pastor Green locked the bakery again, but this time the basement had been checked. The silence answered. Michael remained by the side entrance after everyone else moved on. Officer Harris stood beside him. Good thing you stopped. Michael watched the yellow ribbon tremble against the hinge. She stopped me. The officer glanced at him. You all right? Michael almost said yes. It was the habit, the easy answer. Instead, he thought of the house years ago, the one that looked empty, the one he had not checked twice. He thought of Rosie tapping in the dark and Grace sleeping on frozen concrete because no one had understood her watch. Not all the way, he said. Officer Harris nodded as if that was an honorable answer. Michael reached down and gently freed the yellow ribbon from the splintered hinge. Flour dust clung to it. So did the faint smell of vanilla. He folded it once and placed it in his coat pocket, not as evidence, not as souvenir, but as a reminder that a miracle can be as thin as a ribbon and still strong enough to pull a whole town back to the door. The clinic sat 3 blocks from Main Street, tucked between a pharmacy and a hardware store with snow shovels stacked by the front window. By mid-morning, sunlight had finally reached the sidewalks, turning the frost on car roofs into thin streams of water. Michael arrived there with Pastor Green after finishing the food pantry deliveries he had almost forgotten. He still carried the yellow ribbon in his coat pocket, folded once, warm now from being close to his chest. Inside the clinic, Rosie rested in a small exam room under a quilt printed with blue stars. Claire sat beside her, holding one hand and touching her daughter's hair every few minutes, as if she needed proof that the night had ended. Rosie looked tired, but her eyes were clear, and when Michael stepped into the doorway, she gave him a small smile. Did Grace drink water? She asked. Not in my safe. Not what happened. Grace. Michael nodded. Only after you told her you were okay. Rosie's smile grew just enough to hurt. She listens better than people sometimes. Claire closed her eyes, and a tear slipped down without drama. Yes, she whispered. She does. Dr. Linda Moore had set up Grace in the room next door on a thick blanket near a heater. The German shepherd lay with her paws wrapped in soft pads, her sable and black and tan coat brushed free of frost, amber eyes half open and pointed toward the wall that separated her from Rosie. She lifted her head when Michael entered, then lowered it again after recognizing the quiet in his step. Dr. Moore checked her chart. She is worn out, but she will recover. Rest, food, warm floors, and no sleeping outside bakery doors for a while. Michael looked at Grace. Good luck telling her that. Grace gave a long breath through her nose, almost an answer. Pastor Green came in holding the blue recipe box Rosie had gone to find. He placed it gently on a chair. Eleanor called from the hospital, he said. She cried when I told her Rosie was safe. Then she cried harder when I told her Grace had stayed at the door. Michael took the yellow ribbon from his pocket. Flour dust still clung to the fibers, and one end was frayed where it had caught on the hinge. Rosie had pushed it through the only place small enough for hope to fit. He laid it on the blanket near Grace's nose. The dog sniffed it, then closed her eyes. The message was finished. But for Michael, something inside it was still speaking. He stepped into the hallway, where the clinic smelled of coffee, antiseptic, and wet wool coats. Pastor Green followed him. "You look like a man carrying more than a ribbon," the pastor said. Michael gave a small, tired laugh. "A few years ago, I was helping check on homes after a winter storm. There was one place we thought was empty. No lights, no car, no answer. I moved on." The pastor waited. Michael looked at the floor. "Later, we found out someone had been inside. I have heard that silence ever since." Pastor Green did not rush to cover the pain with comfort. And today, Michael looked through the small window into Grace's room. The German Shepherd had shifted closer to the ribbon, one paw resting near it as she slept. "Today she made me check the door." The pastor nodded. "Then maybe Grace came with claws on wood." Michael looked back at Rosie's room, at her mother holding her hand, at the recipe box rescued from the basement, at the dog who had refused to abandon a closed door. Outside, Main Street went on with its ordinary morning. Inside, everyone who had been hidden had been found. By afternoon, the story had traveled farther than anyone intended. It moved from the clinic to the diner, from the diner to the hardware store, from the hardware store to the church pantry, carried not by gossip, but by the quiet relief of a town that had almost missed a child beneath its own bakery. People came to the clinic with casseroles, stuffed animals, cards, dog treats, and small apologies they did not quite know how to say. Rosie slept through most of it. Grace slept too, though not deeply. Every few minutes, the German Shepherd opened her amber eyes and looked toward the wall between her room and Rosie's, counting without moving. Dr. Moore finally allowed a short visit before evening. Michael carried Grace down the hall because her paws needed rest, and Grace accepted it with the solemn dignity of a tired guardian who disliked being carried but understood the assignment. When they entered Rosie's room, the child sat up against her pillows, wearing a blue clinic sweatshirt that hung past her wrists. "There she is," Rosie whispered. Michael lowered Grace carefully onto the blanket beside the bed, and the dog placed her head in Rosie's lap, with a sigh so deep everyone in the room went still. Claire covered her mouth. Pastor Green bowed his head. For a moment, the clinic was not a clinic. It was a chapel with fluorescent lights. Rosie touched Grace's ears, then looked at Michael. "She heard me through the door," she said. Michael nodded. "She did." Rosie looked down at the dog. "I tapped, but I got tired." Grace's tail moved once against the blanket. Michael felt the yellow ribbon in his pocket, even though it was no longer there. Dr. Moore had placed it in a small paper envelope, so flour dust would not be lost. "You did enough," he said. "Both of you did." Later, Officer Harris came by with an update. The bakery basement door would be repaired, the latch replaced, and the town would install a safety release from the inside. Eleanor Whitman was stable at the hospital and had insisted the first thing rebuilt in her bakery should be Grace's bed. Rosie smiled at that. "By the basement door," she said. Claire looked ready to object, then saw Grace watching Rosie and changed her mind. "Maybe near the counter," she said softly, "where it is warm." Michael stayed after the others drifted out. He stood by the window, watching Main Street turn gold under the late sun. The bakery sign was visible from there, dark for now, but not dead. Pastor Green stepped beside him with 2 paper cups of coffee. "Eleanor wants to speak with you tomorrow," he said. Michael took the cup. "I did not do much." The pastor looked back at Rosie and Grace. "You opened the door." Michael did not answer. He thought again of the old house years before, the one where he had not. The shame was still there, but it had changed weight. It no longer pinned him in place. It sat beside the new memory of Grace's ear pressed to the basement door, the ribbon fluttering at the hinge, the 3 faint taps answered in time. Healing did not erase the room where a man failed. It built another room beside it, one where he finally listened. As evening settled, Rosie fell asleep with one hand resting on Grace's neck. Grace did not move. Dr. Moore dimmed the light. Claire sat nearby, exhausted and grateful. Michael left quietly, stepping into the cold with Pastor Green. Main Street smelled of snowmelt, coffee, and bread from somewhere else, but when Michael passed the closed bakery, he stopped by the side door. The scratches were still there near the bottom panel. He touched them once with his gloved fingers, then looked up at the dark windows. "You stayed," he whispered, though Grace was not there to hear it. And for the first time in years, the closed door in his memory opened just enough to let mercy in. 2 days later, Whitman's bakery was still closed, but it no longer felt abandoned. The front windows had been washed clean, the closed sign had been straightened, and someone from the hardware store had salted the side entrance so no one would slip near the basement door again. Officer Harris had arranged for a new inside safety release, a brighter basement light, and a latch that would never again mistake a child for silence. Michael arrived just after sunrise with Pastor Green, carrying 2 coffees and the small paper envelope that held the yellow ribbon. Frost still edged the sidewalk, but the morning had softened. Main Street smelled of snow melt, truck exhaust, and coffee from the diner across the street. It did not smell like bread yet. That would come later. Eleanor Whitman came home from the hospital that afternoon, moving slowly with a cane, one hand on Rosie's shoulder and the other reaching for Grace before she reached for the bakery keys. The German Shepherd had been cleared by Dr. Moore for short walks, warm floors, and no guarding cold doors unless absolutely necessary. Grace stepped from Claire's car with her paws wrapped lightly, her coat brushed clean, her amber eyes already searching the bakery as if taking inventory of everything that had survived. When Eleanor saw the scratches near the basement door, her face folded. "Oh, Grace," she whispered. The dog leaned against her leg, careful and gentle, as if the old woman were made of the same thin glass as the moment. Rosie stood beside them in a thick pink coat, looking smaller in daylight than she had in the clinic, but steadier. "She would not leave," Rosie said. Eleanor touched the doorframe. "No, she never was good at leaving people behind." Michael stayed near the curb, not wanting to crowd a reunion that belonged to them. But Eleanor turned and held out one hand. "You are the Marine who listened." Michael shook his head slightly. Grace made it hard not to. Eleanor's eyes went to the envelope in his hand. "Is that the ribbon?" He gave it to her. She opened the flap carefully, as if the paper held something holy. The yellow ribbon lay inside, frayed, flour-dusted, faintly scented with vanilla. Rosie touched it with one finger. "I pushed it through the crack," she said. "I thought if Grace smelled cookies, she would stay close." Grace looked up at her name and gave one soft breath. Eleanor pressed the ribbon to her heart. "Then we will keep it where everyone can see." Inside the bakery, the air was cold and stale, but beneath the closed-room dust was still the memory of sugar, butter, yeast, and cinnamon. Michael helped Pastor Green open the blinds while Officer Harris checked the new basement release twice, then a third time because everyone needed to hear it click. Eleanor sat behind the counter and looked at the empty display case. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "we start with bread." Grace lay down beside the basement door, but this time on a folded quilt Rosie had brought from home. She did not press her ear to the crack. She did not scratch. She only rested there while sunlight moved across the floor. Her work finally changed from warning to peace. Michael watched the yellow ribbon placed in a small frame near the register, waiting for the words Eleanor would choose later. For him, the ribbon had already spoken. It had traveled through a locked door, called a dog to stay, and taught a man that even the thinnest thread of hope is strong enough when someone follows it. 1 month later, Whitman's Bakery opened before sunrise, and Main Street knew it before the sign changed. The smell came first. Warm bread, cinnamon, butter, vanilla, and coffee rolled into the cold Pennsylvania morning and gathered on the sidewalk like a welcome back. The front windows glowed gold. The display case held braided loaves, blueberry muffins, sugar cookies tied with yellow ribbon, and one tray of shortbread that Rosie insisted should sit closest to the register. Grace lay on her new bed beside the basement door, not on frozen concrete now, but on a quilt Eleanor had sewn from old bakery aprons. Her paws had healed. Her sable and black and tan coat shone in the morning light. Every time the basement latch clicked during a safety check, Grace lifted her head, watched, then settled again when Rosie gave her a thumbs up from behind the counter. The yellow ribbon was framed beside the register in a small wooden box. Beneath it, Eleanor had written 2 words in careful script. She stayed. People came all morning. Some bought bread. Some brought flowers. Some stood too long near the ribbon and wiped their eyes without explaining why. Officer Harris tested the new basement release for every person who asked to see it, and Pastor Green joked that the bakery now had the safest basement in 3 counties. Rosie laughed at that, and Claire laughed because her daughter could. Michael Carter arrived after his food pantry route, still wearing his dark winter coat, carrying nothing but an appetite and the quiet look of a man who had finally stopped running from one old door. Grace saw him through the glass and rose before the bell above the entrance rang. She crossed the bakery slowly, no hurry, no fear, and pressed her head against his leg. Michael rested one hand between her ears. "Good morning, Grace," he said. Eleanor set a paper bag on the counter for him. "First loaf of the day," she said. "On the house." Michael shook his head, but she pushed it closer. "You opened the door." He looked toward Grace, then toward the framed ribbon. She kept it from being forgotten. The bakery quieted for a moment, not because anyone asked it to, but because truth sometimes lowers every voice in a room. Rosie came around the counter and handed Michael a cookie tied with a yellow ribbon. "For when you need to remember," she said. Michael accepted it with both hands. Outside, sunlight touched the side entrance where the scratches remained near the basement door, not hidden, not repaired away, just smoothed and sealed under clear varnish so the wood would remember without hurting anyone. Michael stepped back onto Main Street, the warm bread under his arm, the cookie ribbon in his palm, and Grace watching from her quilt beside the door. The closed door in his memory did not vanish, but it no longer stood alone. Beside it now was another door, one he had opened in time. Some miracles do not shout from heaven. They sleep outside a bakery, keep watch through the cold, and wait for one person willing to listen through the wood.